My name is Priscilla Wakarera. I'm the CEO and a co-founder at Rhea. We're a soil health management company. I work with my co-founder, Soinato Lebo. She's an astute marketer. I've been very lucky to co-found with her through this journey. So essentially, as a pair, we always go by. So I build and she sells. It's essentially how we're paired. So Rhea is a soil health monitoring company. Provides soil nutritional data to smallholder farmers and guides them on the planting inputs they should use. So in terms of planting inputs, we're looking at what seeds they should use, what fertilizers to use, in what rate and ratio, and then also what other soil conditioners they should use for their pH adjustment. We also provide an irrigation schedule to our farmers. We offer basic soil analysis using a device that we have built. We have a device under patenting. It's called the Rhea AgriPad. It's an IoT sensor-powered device. It analyzes 7 parameters in the soil, and then we have linked it to a software that does analysis of this soil data, present recommendations that are backed by machine learning. Essentially, my background is in soil science. So I'm a soil scientist, having worked in research for over 4 years in soil fertility improvement. And during this time, we realized there was a really big gap between farmers getting the soil nutritional data and actually utilizing it to dictate what inputs they should buy. So as a result, they end up using the wrong inputs and they end up facing very major losses. So with the recommendation software that we have, we are able to cut down those losses by optimizing the inputs that the farmers would then use. And by doing so, we would be saving them money and at the same time increasing their yield. But also, additionally, we have also just worked around the process of soil analysis and cut down the time it takes to do an analysis from about 14 days to about 15 minutes. So yeah,
Wow.
so that's really.
That's very impressive. One of the things that caught my attention was the real-time aspect of it and how much like it's the tech is the core part of your business and what you're trying to build. So I would like to get into the depth of your startup. But before that, how long has it been since you guys launched and like you started with this idea? I know you told me you're a cell scientist and you've been in research for quite some time, but when did the business like well, let's build a business around this? When did that start?
2022, end of 2022. So that's November 2022. So that's the day that we decided, okay, now we're going to register this thing and actually do it as an actual thing. Um,
Okay. So what was the
Initially, mhm.
go ahead.
No, I think I was preempting your question. So how we came about it or how we thought, why we actually came to it, was that the question was preempting?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
So how we actually worked around it was, so I mentioned that I worked as in soil fertility improvement research. So during this time, we're working on microbial inoculants that could substitute use of chemical fertilizers. We worked in Kenya and in across about 3 regions. So during this time, we had to collect soil samples as a baseline survey, send them to the lab, have them analyzed, and then use that data to then have it as backup data against the data that we were going to be collecting from the improvement of the microbial inoculant. But then this was, I think, around just after COVID, but it was still kind of COVID. So it was like 2021. So we collected the soil samples and we sent them to the lab. So essentially, we were told that it would take about 14 days. So we had many samples. We had over 100 samples. So on getting them from the farm to getting them to the lab, it took over a week because then you have to collect the samples physically, load them into a vehicle, and then the lab testing areas are located in Nairobi and in other just really large towns which are away from the farming areas. And then you'd have to have a vehicle transport them. And then they're bulky because you have half a kg, at least half a kg per sample, and you have over 100 samples. So it's really heavy. So in terms of transporting them from the farms and onto the lab, it took a long time. It was expensive. And then once they got to the lab, we were told they would take 14 days, but it ended up taking 3 months. So these were 3 months of us following up every now and then, trying to make sure that the samples we can get the results. And it was a real big hassle. And then when we did get the results, we just got the results as numbers. So this is your soil data, here it is. So it's like, okay, so this is for our research, this is exactly what I need, but what do you give farmers? And then when we try to find out how the presentation to the farmers is, it was in the same form. So we were going to give the results to the farmers because it was their soil anyway, but now we had to then interpret the results, come up with a form that they could then understand, and then give it to them. And even then, they still had to now go back and search for how do I then use them. So I imagined if it was such a hassle for us as scientists, and even knowing the guidance that you should provide them, how much worse was it for the smallholder farmers? So we ran a study for about 3 months. So out of the study, so we ran the study in Rwanda and we ran the study in Kenya. So we wanted to find out which landscape. So in the time period, we realized that a majority of the smallholder farmers, either one, did not know the importance of soil analysis because they had never done a soil analysis before. Two, the ones that actually did know about soil analysis either thought that the process was expensive and they couldn't afford it, or it was too tedious for them to do, and they did not know where they could even find a single lab. And then three, we also had farmers that had actually conducted a soil analysis once, but had not conducted any repeat soil testing. And incidentally, the reason they hadn't conducted repeat soil testing is because when they did the first soil test, it was such a hassle that they just felt like it wasn't worth doing anymore. So we tried to figure out what the major problems were. So the major problems were access to laboratories for soil testing, the whole inconvenience in the process of cell analysis, carrying the sample, sending it to the lab, having to wait a long period, and then the timeliness. So that's what we innovated around. So we created a solution that would provide convenience, in that we're able to conduct cell analysis on site with our devices at the farm level, cutting out sending a sample to the lab. And then we're able to do it in real time, cutting the time from 14 days plus transport time to just about 15 minutes on the farm. And then at the same time, we are working with agro input shops in the village level and ensuring that they have access to the soil testing devices. And then by having access to them, then they're able to provide the service to the farmers at their local level. So in as much as it's additional income for the shops, it also creates accessibility for the farmers in that region.
Oh, this is so cool. Thank you for that detailed explanation. So yeah, that was actually one of the things that I was curious about because uh, in the part of the region where I'm from, well, I'm not really very well read on this topic of soil testing, but I don't think a lot of farmers utilize these types of tests, and uh, they don't utilize laboratories to get an accurate read on the pH or whatever other chemical information, molecular information that they need. So that was my first question. Like, was it a big demand? And then I guess you've answered that as well. So once they have utilized the services that you used, I would like to know if there are any success stories, data that can show that the work that you're doing is actually creating a better yield for the farmers.
So as a company, we try to focus on three key principles. So at Rhea, we believe in sustainable yield production. So we're also looking at environmental conservation and also economical empowerment of smallholder farmers. So all the impact metrics that we track revolve around this. So majorly and maybe socially as well. So we do farmer trainings to enlighten farmers on the importance of soil health management. We also have a chatbot that the farmers can learn about soil health management on their own and ask questions and work through it. So along this, we've been collecting data around conversion rate, how many farmers actually come to the trainings and then conduct a soil test afterwards, And then also how many farmers after our training then go on to become trainers of trainers in their local level. So we also have data on based off the trainings and having subsequent trainings in the area, how many farmers are able to see value in getting it and then coming back. And then we've seen a very high incidence of repeat farmers coming on trainings and referrals a lot based off that. So we are also gauging the level of understanding of it for in terms of soil health management in the areas, and we've seen a very high increase. So when we started out, it was very low. Conversion rate, I think, for training was just about 20%. So we've been training for a year now, and it's risen to about 40% now. We're hoping that those numbers keep increasing the more people become more self-aware, and then the more farmers come back for repeat trainings. So we also do, based off the chemical parameters, we're running a pilot study with some of the farms that we've been working in. We're currently tracking about 48 farms. Out of those 48 farms, so we're going to be tracking them for a period of 3 years, which is 2 seasons per year. But so far, with the improvements that we have, we've seen a very large improvement in terms of soil pH improvements based off the recommendations that we provide. Previously acidic soils, getting to relatively normal neutral soil levels that are conducive for the crops that they can grow in these areas. We've also been
Sorry
working with some
for,
of the
could you elaborate what's
sorry?
the ideal? Because most of our audience probably doesn't have a really depth understanding as much as you do. For you, this is very,
Oh
top of
yeah.
your mind.
Sorry,
So,
yeah, I totally understand that. It's like so
so
essentially.
yeah,
Mhm. Yes.
what's the optimum uh, condition for a soil for it to be considered?
So that's the interesting thing about soil, though. So we don't have a specific optimum soil range. So for example, so pH, so we have a range for pH. So we have acidic soils, and then we have neutral, and then we have very alkaline soils. So ideally, what you're looking for most crops, so some crops thrive in acidic soils, some crops thrive in very alkaline soils. So, and then other crops, most crops actually thrive between almost a level of both, not too acidic and not too alkaline, which is ranges around neutrality. And what you find is it depends on the type of crop. So with our recommendation system, we give our recommendations tailored per the specific type of crop that the farmer is growing. So when we're estimating improvement, we're checking improvement in terms of for this particular region, for this type of soil and this type of crops to be grown, have you achieved the optimum level of soil pH to grow them? So that's what we've been predominantly focusing on. But in some areas, we do have, just generally speaking, we have had areas that have had very low nitrogen levels, and essentially nitrogen is very critical for most of the crops that we grow, especially in Africa. And so just ensuring that we can get the soil to a level where most crops would thrive in that range. Another thing that we try to focus on a lot is increasing the soil organic carbon. So that's a metric that's easy to measure in terms of if the soil organic carbon is high, that's good. If it's low, that's bad. So it doesn't depend on whatever type of crop you're growing. So generally for a soil, the higher the soil organic carbon, that's what we're targeting essentially. So we're tracking this impact, but at the same time, something else that we have started tracking is how much savings farmers make based off using our recommendations. So we are working in partnership with the agro input shops, but also we're working in partnership with some with some nutrient fertilizer providers, but at the same time, we're also working in partnership with some of the amendment providers. So to ensure that some of the items, the inputs that we require are available at the shops, and we're able to track. So for example, if last season, without using a recommendation, this is how much money you spent on fertilizer, and this season, this is how much money you spent vis-a-vis, this is how much you harvested, and this is how much you're harvesting now. We're able to tell whether you're increasing you're increasing your output while decreasing the amount of money you use during inputs. So that's really critical for us as well.
Wow. Okay. So, a few questions here. I've heard you mention it 2 times now. Agri input shops. Is it uh, is it like a company on its own? I haven't heard this term before.
So we have a B2B model. essentially, so we have agro input shops. So these are shops where farmers purchase fertilizers. They're owned, so they're independent shops that are owned by independent parties.
I
So
see.
we have onboarded the shops as agents for soil analysis. So these shops typically have their salespeople as agronomists to advise, and then we are training the agronomists on conducting of soil analysis and providing our devices to the shops so that now farmers can then get their soil analyzed at the local level. So the agro input shops they stock fertilizers, they stock seeds, they stock soil conditioners. Generally, they are a one-stop shop for a farmer, and typically farmers usually visit these farms about twice in a week, and even more times during planting seasons.
So another question here would be this devices, this IoT devices that you have built. Is it going to be sold to the farmers, or is it going to be rented, or is it a one-time test and then they have to return it? How is the arrangement that you're?
We currently have two models. One we have Rhea agents, so we have our own agronomists that use the devices to go conduct soil analysis at the farm level. So we do this for individual farmers that request soil analysis either through our website or maybe by calling. And we also do this for projects, either an organization or a cooperative society requires an area of land tested. So we have our own agents bring the devices to the ground, conduct the analysis, and then provide the recommendations. But we are also working with the agro input shops on a list where they list the devices, and then they also get a commission per test from each soil analysis that they do. So essentially, what this does is it increases the amount of revenue that they get on a monthly and creates access for the farmers. So essentially, it's not a device for a smallholder farmer. It makes more economical sense to purchase if you're either a large farmer that plants over a large area in rotation requiring many tests. Instead of procuring our services to do the soil analysis, it makes more sense for you to just list the device and then pay on a per test basis.
Yeah, that was my question. How are you? What's the strategy to make it more affordable to this farmer? So yeah, that answers my question. And I have a very clear idea of the business now, and I want to get into how it started. Uh, but before I start, asking about your journey, I want to hear the financing journey of the business, because when you get started, you want to build
Mm.
this business, and then uh, earlier we were also chatting some of the challenges that early startups face is financing. So when you and your co-founder noticed this gap and you decided to start your company, did you bootstrap? Did you go out look for investors? How was that process? Because you have to go to the
Okay.
farmers, there's research is involved, you have to have a tech team, there's data analysis, you're working with,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah. So I know we said that we would start with my journey, but it kind of ties into it. So
uh,
essentially, before even being in the sciences as well, I've always been interested in entrepreneurship and running businesses on the side. But when I ran into this problem, I knew that it was a problem that needs scale. So the businesses I was used to running used to be so in Kenya we call a normal biashara, which is a normal business. So whereby it's just you sell things and then you get money. It's not something you plan on taking to 2, 3 counties or 2, 3 countries, or you don't even ever dream of serving 1 million customers, and you're good like most entrepreneurs at that level. But I knew that I wanted to build a business that would have impact over millions of farmers because it was a problem that was critical. And it was during a time when during a time when the country was going through a really big struggle in terms of food security. So we were importing most of our food and we had issues with importation. at some point. So we didn't have enough food, and the prices of food was skyrocketing. And essentially, this meant that we have a solution locally, but how do we get it out, right? So I realized that we have a very big gap, and part is even before going into financing, part of it came into how do you actually start a startup? Like, how do you form a startup? And knowing everything you know about entrepreneurship and running a business, it's really quite different, in the sense that you're expected to grow really quickly. And I didn't know that. Like, I had no idea. I knew I need to know, but like I didn't know it. So I think I sourced out online, and I was like, okay, I'm going to look for all these short courses that I can do that will teach me how to run a startup. And apparently, they're not that many. I think you can get some now, but by that time, I didn't think we didn't get that many. And try to reach out to some of the people running businesses. But now I understand they must have been very busy because I'm very busy right now. And just getting information was hard. So I got lucky and I got into the Jasiria Talent Investor Program. So it's a program that's run by the Alan and Jill Gray Foundation. It's headquartered in Rwanda. So when I got in, it was taking entrepreneurs from Kenya and Rwanda, but now they're doing Kenya, Ethiopia, and Rwanda. So I think they're expanding across East Africa, so their reach is wider. And that's actually where I met my co-founder. So it's a program that essentially teaches you how to understand the problem that you want to solve, and then how to innovate around that problem and create a solution that would be one, have the highest impact for the people that you're building it for, but at the same time be scalable. So I got into that program. It's a 3 month program. Yeah, so it's a 4 month program. So 1 month online and then 3 months residential in Rwanda. And then at the end, you're supposed to pitch for a grant. So, and then companies that are successful would get awarded the grant. So we were successful and we got awarded a grant at that level. So my co-founder and I started building on the grant, and that's how we were able to do a first prototype, do market research, build our first prototype, and then at the same time go to market.
Wow. So this is 2022.
Yeah. End
Wow.
of 2022. Yeah.
That's so fast. Build a prototype, go to market, and I've gone through your social media on LinkedIn specifically, and also your website, and it seems like it's very well. Like I've seen the photos of the farmers and the trainings, and yeah, kudos to you. That's very impressive.
Yeah. So we got
Yeah.
so when we did get the grant, you go into venture creation. So venture creation is the period where I think we had the most farmer interaction, just testing out different models. And then I think it it still kind of feels like bootstrapping because you have it does kind of feel like bootstrapping because you have limited resources and you have so many things to do at the very initial phases. You're trying to build prototypes and then you're trying to go into the market to test it out. And I think during that journey, the one thing that we learned, the one lesson that I learned that I think I'll use for a very long time is to just build with who you're building for. So like build with your customers. I think that's why maybe on our social media you'll find that we have so many farmer interactions because we decided that we could build this, we could just get an office, sit down, build this whole product to the end, and then take it out. But I know farmers, like I have worked with farmers for a long time. They will kick you out. They'll be like, we don't want it, we're not paying. That's it, bye. So essentially we figured so the most cost effective way to do it is to make one change, take it out, see what I think, come back, make an alteration based on that. And yeah, so we built version 2 of our prototype. And now I think now we're in the third version. We should go into product of the prototype, which is now hopefully after this pilot becomes the final product that we can now have on shelves. And it's been a really great lesson to work with farmers while building a tech innovation. But it's also been very difficult to build hardware devices. So it's a hardware software device. So in terms of investment, I think most investors are very shy of hardware devices, especially innovations. And I think that's one of the things that pre-seed companies that are building innovative products. That's the biggest challenge because a lot of money goes into your research and development, and with investors, they're looking at high, like quick returns. Like they want safe returns. So if a lot of the chunk of the money they invest goes into R&D, it's ideally not what they're going for. But I think we've been able to optimize around it. Yeah.
That's very so that's very interesting. So what do you think now? Which phase do you think you are at right now? Like you said, you're at this moment you're optimizing. Also, I think you're also in the research phase. You're studying and optimizing your products, like you said. What do you think is the next phase, and what challenges are you trying to tackle in terms of finance, maybe, or operations, or human resource to that next level? What challenges are you trying to solve to reach that next milestone?
So we're currently in the beta phase in terms of our development. So we're running a pilot towards from the end of this month all the way up to end of June. And essentially, the next phase for us is to just make our devices more scalable. We have optimized in terms of functionality. We've optimized in terms of customer feedback and what works for the customers. But now we are now going to look at scaling the model. So we've currently only been working in 3 counties in Kenya, and our target is to get to 33 counties. But for us to get to 33 counties, it means that we need to manufacture more devices and onboard more agrovet agents. So in terms of resources, we've had new hires this year, and we're going to have to hire more in the coming years. We're going to be increasing our human resource. We're also going to be increasing in terms of product device production, and then also just a lot of marketing. So in terms, we're going to be opening up a pre-seed round. So we still pre-seed. We plan on opening our pre-seed round towards the end, immediately after the pilot. So that will be in July. And so we are optimizing towards that. We've started investor discussions around it, and we have a bit of a bias towards impact investors. I think I just did the mental thinking tree thing. But we do have a bit of a bias because our solution is really pegged towards changing lives for farmers, but at the same time stabilizing economies. And especially when you look at the African landscape, the only thing that can stabilize our economies is sustainable food production. Um, so we waste too many resources by not using data to guide us in our processes. So we just need investors that are also aligned towards that being a goal. And I think the investors are there. I think what you mentioned is true. So we do have startups that are at a stage that require investments, and we have investors that require companies to invest in, but just matching them has become a bit of an issue. So I think ideally we have a lot of accelerator programs that are aligned towards impact, which is great. And we've also seen an influx, especially in Nairobi, of impact investors coming, especially after SunCalp last in April. In Feb, after SunCalp in Feb, and also during the Africa Tech Week, we've had
Sorry,
discussions with
could you repeat that? I didn't get that.
So we had
I'm
SunCalp in Feb.
in Feb.
Yeah, in February,
Oh,
in the
okay,
month.
okay.
Yeah. So we had SunCalp in the month of Feb, which brought many impact investors into Nairobi, and also the Africa Tech Week. So we're seeing a lot of focus towards it. So we also because we are in the soil health management space, and the fact that we mostly deal with soil regenerative practices, we've been encouraging most of our farmers to just increase their soil organic carbon. So we've also had a lot of a leaning towards just climate and impacting our environment. And that's also been one of the key areas that we're looking at. So in terms of investors, we're looking at climate investors, impact investors as well for this first phase of investment.
Great. Yeah. So one question I want to raise here is during the early stages when you were doing some early market research. You said you're conducting some between Kenya and Rwanda. Well, is your co-founder from Kenya as well?
Yes. So my co-founder is from Kenya, and the reason we were conducting the market research also in Rwanda is because when we started our market research phase, we were in the talent investor program in Rwanda, and I think most for us, it's also an environment. So when you look at Rwanda as a country in terms of soil analysis, they have very limited access to soil testing. So a majority of the soil analysis that's done in Rwanda is conducted in Kenya. So clearly, there's a very huge gap in terms of offering soil testing services to come to Rwanda as well. So we decided to move to Kenya and set up in Kenya first, and then progress later on to Rwanda, because we realized that we needed to do a lot of iteration in terms of building. And Kenya is a fast economy in that the technology uptake is very high. So introducing new technologies to farmers who have even limited literacy levels, I think because of the technological advancements we've had in the country, they're more receptive to new technologies. And then also it's a large enough market to experiment on and get a view of. So it's different. The market is different it's large and it's different. So if you experiment in one area and then you experiment in a different area, you would get a view of essentially what it would feel like to go maybe into Uganda, into Rwanda, into Tanzania, but you get a small pool of all of that, small sample of all of that in Kenya. So that's why we decided to set up here and then scale to Rwanda afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, I got it. I have so many questions. Like when you're talking, also just questions just popping into my head. Uh, but when when you're testing your ideas and when you're working in Kenya and Rwanda, you've mentioned that Kenya is a more adaptive and more fast-paced environment. So what opportunities do you see as I think this is your first attempt at entrepreneurship, your first
It's
company?
my first attempt at a startup. So previously, I've had a company. I've run I think two companies previously, but
Oh,
not as a startup. So it's
oh, okay.
different as a regular business.
Oh, okay.
It was water bottling, so it's a regular business.
Water bottling.
Yeah, so it's a manufacturing essentially.
Oh, I didn't see it on the profile. That would have been my first question.
I think it should be there. It just doesn't say founder.
Okay. So how long did you run that, if you don't mind me asking?
So I worked in manufacturing for bottled water since 2016.
Uh,
So that was, I think, employed for about 3 years. And then I started my own company end of 2018. Ran that, closed for a bit through COVID and then reopened. It's still operational now.
wow.
So so it's still operational now. I just don't have an active management role
Hmm.
because of how demanding running the soil health management company is,
Mm,
but it's still running.
wow. Okay. Okay. Then now I have more questions, but let me focus here. Let me focus here and then ask you about what opportunities, what possibilities do you see in Kenya as an entrepreneur?
As an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
So I'll start with the bias
Hmm.
and start in opportunities in agriculture.
Yeah.
So because it's the landscape I'm very familiar with. So I think there's a very big opportunity in terms of data. Getting agricultural data to the farmers, not just soil testing data, just weather data, input data, market analytics data. So there's a very big gaps in terms of agricultural data and how to get it to the farmers, but at the same time, how to get it to the farmer in such a way that it's beneficial one, but at the same time, it's affordable for them. A majority of the farmers in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, are smallholder farmers. So their ability to pay for things is very limited. But at the same time, there are millions. So if
Mm,
your solution is affordable, then your market is large enough for you to make it affordable. So that's, I think that's the best thing. So I think there's technologies that people can leverage. I think people should try and leverage more on data analytics and AI as well in
mm,
agriculture. But at the same time, we've had a boom around this is around Lipa Later, which is pay later for inputs. So that there's a great opportunity there when it's narrowed down to the farmer level, but allowing them to just pay at harvesting. We've also had, I think there's also an opportunity in terms of warehouse receipting, because most of the farmers, what happens is you harvest your food, and then at the end of the harvest, like right now, most farmers have harvested maize, but the problem that they are facing right now is that the price of maize is very low because
mm,
everybody has.
mm,
So, and then in the next 2 or 3 months, the price will skyrocket, but the farmers already sold for a cheaper price. So I think a warehouse receipting system would be very beneficial for
mm,
them in terms in that landscape, and insurance as well, just crop
mm,
insurance
mm,
because of how unpredictable our weather is, but also because of pest and disease. Also
mm,
innovations around pest and disease management. But then generally speaking, I think the biggest boom in Africa right now is around fintech, also integration
mm,
of fintech into agriculture as well. So I think there's a
mm,
great opportunity there for entrepreneurs to tap into.
mm,
Water and sanitation as well is really critical, especially for most urban areas. But then we
mm,
think urban areas, but also the rural areas have a water and sanitation issue as well. So we see this a lot when we're working with the farmers in the rural areas,
mm,
which is interesting because people don't think about it in that level.
mm,
Um, I
mm,
think a boom that's risen is around transport and mobility. I think that's also really great in terms of booming. And then I'll go back to my bias. Um, okay, so I have too many bias. So I'll go back to my my bias. I don't think we have enough companies. I don't think we have enough companies innovating around biotechnology.
mm,
Um, but at the same time, we have too many biotechnology scientists currently in most countries that are not being utilized. So we're finding
mm,
them going into other fields, and they're not able to utilize the information that they have to create products. And I know the biggest limitation for this is the amount of capital that goes into research and development. So maybe if we could have investors that would be willing to invest in research and development for biotechnology companies, it would really create a really big boom because we have so many proteins that people could make that could be beneficial. And instead of having to import them, so essentially, 90% of chemicals, biological, you call them biological chemicals, biological reagents that are based
mm,
off biotechnology have to be imported from Europe or even just Asia. And the gap becomes, because of the importation, the costs become very high, hindering a lot of research in Africa, making it too expensive to embark on. So if we could have maybe just local development in that space, I think that's a space I'd be interested in going into
mm, mm.
as well. And then my final bias is on carbon credits. So the carbon
Carbon
space is
credits.
becoming very large. Yeah, the carbon space is becoming very large, and we think carbon credits, and it's very wide. So for us, we do onboarding for carbon credits for our smallholder farmers, but we do it in partnership with a company that offers carbon credits.
Could you explain what carbon credit is?
Oh yeah, so carbon credits. So I'd mentioned about increasing the soil organic carbon in your soil.
Yeah.
So
Mm,
increasing the soil organic carbon in your soil is essentially called carbon sinking. So your the more carbon you're able to have in your soil as a stock, the more
mm,
carbon you're able to remove from the environment.
oh,
And what happens is it creates a balance in the ecosystem, and it reverses climate change. So it's a climate mitigation strategy. So as smallholder farmers, or essentially even in Africa, the easiest methods to do this would be through agricultural practices. One, which would be planting of more trees, so trees
mm,
act as carbon stocks. And then also just utilizing technologies such as use of biochar. So biochar is combusted dry matter from harvesting. So if you harvest your maize, you burn the maize stalks, but you don't burn them all the way to ash. And then you use that, you put that back into your soil, and then you retain all the carbon that had grown on that plant back into your soil. So it's like it's still sinking. So essentially what happens is, so for farmers that are able to do that, so the more carbon you're able to sink in your soil, and then we analyze that and we see that this is how much carbon you sunk in your soil. We have companies that, by virtue of industrialization, for example, oil companies, and by virtue of these industries, they release carbon into the environment. So what they do is they pay money to offset the carbon that they release. And then this money is then transferred to the smallholder farmers who practice regenerative practices as a source of income and as an encouragement to continue doing it. So a credit is measured by the metric ton of carbon you're able to sink. And then now you can get paid per metric ton of carbon that you're able to sink. So this whole process, it's a whole market. So it's a whole market that's accessible to farmers in Africa generally, and that they can tap into right now, because over the next few years it's going to become very large. So it's better to get in now as it's starting out, because the payment, the increase of carbon is on a per year basis. So the sooner you start, the more you get paid for in the long run. And then this can be used to encourage. It's not even about, so for us, we try to let farmers know that it's not about how much money you paid from the carbon credits, more than it's about how well you're able to improve your soil. Because the better your soil improves, then the more yield you're going to have. So either way, it's a win-win situation. It's like, oh my God, we won. Oh my God, we won again. So it's like twice. So yeah, so essentially that's it. So the carbon credits market is split into many aspects. So there's the section where you're increasing the carbon directly. The other ways of for the carbon credits, I'm just going to focus on what we do in terms of cell management. But so there's that aspect. We also have people that make softwares in the carbon credit space. So if people are purely into tech, there are softwares for optimization for the carbon credits tagging as well. So we have digital MRVs, and then moving on, we have the sales. So currently, sale is limited to very specific companies, but I feel like we currently don't have any companies locally that do validation for the carbon credit. And you have to pay companies maybe from India, because carbon credit is big in India. You have to pay companies from India to come all the way to Africa to do validation. But so clearly that's a gap in terms of opportunities. Yeah.
Wow. Actually, this is very valuable, and for me also, this is the first time I'm hearing about carbon sinking and the opportunities in that space, and I hope whoever is going to be listening to this is a very interesting area to explore. And just like we talked about the opportunities and the potential of Kenya and the general path, I would say this goes for Africa as well, just generally. How do you see, what challenges are you like struggling with as an entrepreneur? Just like when we saw the opportunities, what challenges do you face? And then I have one more question. I'm not going to take too much of your time, and then we can summarize. What are like the core issues? Because I hope, like I said earlier, I want this. You're a very impressive person. I just want to start with that. And this is exactly the reason that we want to do this, is to give people like you a platform to showcase the work and the innovation that you're trying to bring to the Kenya and the continent. And I want to I want to hear what the challenges, like the real challenges that you're facing, in hopes that someday someone's gonna hear this and provide value and say, oh, I can fix this, we can work together.
Okay, so we have very many challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, so break them down. So as a hardware software company, building in Africa, building an actual hardware device in Africa has been very challenging. because of prototyping facilities. So we have very limited prototyping facilities that are available for startup founders at the very early stage, literally where you have no money essentially to innovate. You just have the skills to. So you require equipment, you require maybe 3D printing or even just technological support. So we have very limited prototyping facilities in the continent. So when we started out, I think we have a few that maybe people could look into. So we have Fab Lab. If you're in Rwanda and if you're in Kenya, so I don't know if Fab Lab is available in Ethiopia.
It is, it is.
Yeah, so we have Fab Labs across the globe actually, and in Africa, so in Kenya as well. So there's that limitation. So we have limited prototyping facilities, but we also have limited PCB fabrication facilities. So when we started out and we needed to fabricate the circuit boards that go into our devices, we had to do that in China. And then so we make our devices, send it out to China, and then we would get it printed from there and then get it sent back. And the biggest challenge that we faced with that was the quality control process. So we would end up getting a low yield in terms of the devices that we can actually manufacture since we were manufacturing in-house. So we've been lucky in the sense that in the process of the whole exhibitions and just talking to different stakeholders, we did meet the founder of Gearbox Europlacer. So Gearbox Europlacer is an electronics manufacturing company. So we have a partnership with them for production of our devices, which has ensured that we have better quality control. But at the same time, they have an academy that would support entrepreneurs that are coming in the electronics hardware space. And they had, I think, a prototyping facility as well. So that's essentially one of the key challenges that we have in terms of prototyping facilities. So in Rwanda, we really struggled because of trying to import the different parts. But then at the same time, we had the same problem in Kenya as well. Another challenge that we have before we get into financing is around, so we have the right type of skills coming out of universities. So especially in Kenya, the literacy levels are very high. So we have very many university graduates, but the difference is in terms of actual skills. So they have the theory for how something should work, but they haven't had the opportunity to actually test it out in different areas. So maybe there's a skill gap in that perspective. So we've had to really, in terms of our own team, we've had to really work in terms of capacity building for our own team to ensure that they can make the right type of product. And then I think I'll go into financing so you can leave my head.
It's just going around.
It's like, I'll see you last, but then it keeps coming back. So let me just finish up with so that I can go into other things. So financing is a really big challenge, clearly. It's top of my head. It's a really big challenge, and especially for pre-seed level. And this is mostly because of the type of traction that's required for companies at pre-seed stage now. So essentially, for some of the concepts that we have, so I'll use ourselves as an example, going through the initial prototype and then going into an alpha prototype and then building a beta prototype, it's resource intensive. So the reason we've been able to do it is because we've received a few awards and gotten a few grants. But without them, to be very honest, I don't think we would have been able to innovate as fast. So just factoring in other companies that started out at the same time, but did not ideally fall into the same path that we fell into, they struggle a lot with their prototyping because of funds. I think most investors, so I think we just need more impact focused investors at the early stage and also long-term investors. So somebody who sees the long-term vision of the company in such that we are able to build now and then we will get the product afterwards, because we do see this in Silicon Valley a lot. We see investments. It's like I interact with founders at some of the showcases and forums that we have who maybe come from outside the continent, and they're surprised that we haven't opened our pre-seed round, or we're just at pre-seed right now. And we have the number of customers that we have, and we've had the number of users that we had, because for them, they get investment just at idea stage, and they get enough investment at idea stage to develop the product, hire a team, and get the product into market. So if we could have the same level of trust for African startups, then it would benefit them a lot. So I think I've seen a lot of my peers in the field talk about Africans being overtrained and underfunded. So it's true. So it's true. I agree. At the same time, I think as someone who came in wanting to get trained, I think for us getting into the accelerator program that we have been in has been really beneficial. I know that at some point you get into a cycle of accelerators and you end up doing the same things over and over again. I think at some point it was like you find a company that's 5 years in. So in some of the programs that we would potentially be in, you find the company that's there is 7 years in. And for us, we're just about 16 months old, and you're going through the same cycle. So when you try to see how they've been able to grow, but they keep coming back in a circle, you realize that there's a funding gap to propel some of these companies become larger as large as they should be in terms of scaling. And so I think there's an investor mismatch for the different stages. So if we could maybe fix that, then it would be very beneficial for it. I think I've also seen a lot of investments investing into the founder. So I just would like to emphasize more for investors to trust founders and the visions more. But also, I've also seen an influx of investors, maybe not for us, but for companies that are a little older than us, just providing funding, but zero support, but providing very terrible terms. And this is for companies that are just going to seed stage. So you get a lot of funding. You don't get any other support in terms of market or scaling, just the money. But then they have demands for how you're supposed to scale into 7 countries because you've gotten this funding, but you've not even studied your own market well enough to expand. And so I'll say this. So I think we've seen a lot of companies dying in Kenya. I'll use our case because it's the market that I've studied. And when I look at why these startups that was also glorious fail, it's because they either one expanded too fast or two they diversified more than they should have. But then when you go back and talk to the actual founders, they tell you it wasn't the vision. So that was in part of the vision from the start. It was like we got investment and then we scaled in this way because that's what the investors wanted us to do, and it crashed them. So essentially just getting the right founder investor fit and vision investor fit as well.
Very key.
Yeah.
Very key. It's like you're bringing in another co-founder almost, especially at the seed stage, at the pre-seed stage, when you're taking money and at the seed or pre-seed, where we're talking in terms of startups, it's long term. And one thing I keep hearing again and again, also you mentioned it earlier, is a lot of African investors are still, I don't want to generalize, but in the traditional business, they want to get quick returns. And we don't see this long-term thinking and what that's common in the Western ecosystem, and yeah, very, very valuable lessons. So I don't want to take too much of your time. So to end with a high note, what do you see the potential for your startup, and in terms of whether it being in Kenya across different counties or operating continental, let's say 5 years? What's the vision? What's the dream?
Okay, so the dream in 5 years is to have accomplished a certain percentage of food security that is based off interventions by data. So essentially, our target for the next 5 years is to have trained about 3 million farmers across Africa. And the training will be either through organizations or through our chatbot. And what this will do is we target to change the culture around soil testing. So the same way Africans know that you should use fertilizer for farming is the same way. We want them to know that you should do a soil test before purchasing fertilizer and then farming. So that's ideally what our key target is. As a company, over the next year, we're going to be expanding into 33 counties in Kenya. So it's the 33 agricultural counties. After that, we'll be expanding into the East African region. We've mapped out about 7 countries in Africa that we're going to be expanding to. We have a few partnerships for West Africa that are in the pipeline that we're very optimistic about. And we've also had a very high demand in terms of requests coming in from there. So we're really looking forward to moving into that geography as well. But as a company, essentially for us, when we think about our vision, it's really impact tied. We just want to impact as many smallholder ecosystems as we can and make soil testing a lifestyle.
Awesome. Yeah, I just I've learned a lot, and I hope that it would reflect in whoever is going to be watching this. And like I said, this is the reason that we want to keep doing this. Like there are people like you everywhere, and we want to give you a platform to shine and to hopefully also showcase the challenges that you're facing, so that you can find someone that can take you to the next step. And I'm really grateful for your time, and I hope we'll stay connected, and we'll our community can help in some way. Thank you
Yeah,
again for your
thank
time.
you. It's been a pleasure to connect and have this discussion.